So you want to be a dungeon master?
That's great. We're here to help. I'm Taylor.
And I'm Justin. This week, we're going to be going over the basics of creating encounters. Your players can face a huge variety of situations that vary from social to combat and all kinds of combinations in between. There's random, there's pre-planned, there's encounters that take a tight 15 minutes, and there's some that'll take hours. Whether you're prepping a session or having a couple locked and loaded just in case, encounters are here to stay. So let's talk about them. But first...
Let's talk about them. But first.
I was going to be but first. What is a plane of existence that you haven't yet gotten to play in, either as a DM or a player, that you would love to explore?
I think when we first were just talking about it, the first thing that comes to mind is elemental planes.
Yeah, definitely.
It's just, there's such a big variety of them.
Yeah.
But also, like, each one is like its own thing. Like, there's the elemental plane of fire, there's the elemental plane of water, there's the elemental plane of air. And just trying to think of things that go in those spaces is something that's kind of fun, you know?
Absolutely. 1,000,000% thinking about what a town would look like in each of those locations.
Yeah.
Like what the people are like, what, you know me, I love food and shit. So thinking about like what their food is like, you know, like is the elemental plane of fire. All I can think about actually is Avatar: The Last Airbender, and just thinking that the fire plane would have a lot of spicy food.
Yeah.
My sister got the Avatar cookbook, and all of the Fire Nation recipes were spicy.
I feel like that's just too easy. I feel like that's low-hanging fruit almost. Like, you should make,
sure.
Like, the fire specialty should be something super cold.
Yeah, exactly. That's like the other thing too that I love about thinking about the elemental planes is planning encounters that would sort of be a little surprising.
Mm-hmm.
So like the elemental plane of fire having some sort of water feature, whether it's an ocean or a river, a swamp or something like that. And maybe it's like boiling. Maybe the air that gets pushed off of the hot air, you have to fly by in like one of those bayou fan boats, but it hovers because it's like being pushed by the hot air that's being released by the evaporation or something. Like, so many interesting ideas. And then like I also like the idea of thinking about where the elemental planes cross one another. Like, if you think of them, I'm not necessarily saying this is like,
I was kind of thinking about that too. Yeah.
But like the transitionary areas
between like the elemental plane of water and the elemental plane of fire, right? Yeah, I was like thinking about that. Like, why would there be water there unless it's just tapped into this unlimited source of water? Because if it's always evaporating away, eventually it's going to go away, unless it's got a whole plane full of water connected to it. Then it's not going anywhere.
Exactly. And then it's
like just going to sit there and boil
this
forever.
Mini plane of steam.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Oh, that's cool.
All kinds of shit like
that.
Yeah.
Or
like earth and water is just like so much mud.
It's just all mud. The mud plane.
It's so much mud. Yeah, I think that's so fucking cool. And then another plane that is like always on my mind is the plane of Mechanus.
Okay.
It's the true neutral plane. So this is where like like Modrons.
Mm-hmm.
That's where they
little
come
robot
from.
people things. Yeah.
If you're going like lore as written, you know, according to the books and shit, then that's where they would come from, is Mechanus. This like super orderly. I think it is very lawful, but also very neutral in the sense. God, it's been so long since I've really read about all of the extraplanar shit. You know what I mean? Like, especially the outer planes, because like there's the inner planes, which is Shadowfell, Feywild, and the elements, and then there's the outer planes, which includes the Nine Hells and the Abyss, which get a lot of love from a lot of modules and adventure books and stuff.
Yeah.
And then there's the upper planes, which I feel like don't get that much love. You know, like
we
don't hear about the Beastlands or Elysium, or I know some of their names, but like that's it. Like I have a vague idea that Elysium has like kind of like the that sort of like Judeo-Christian vibe of like there's lots of clouds. You know what I mean?
It's very bright and cloudy.
There. Yeah, exactly. The Beastlands,
but it's not cloudy where you think it is.
Yeah, like, but I'd be really, really interested to learn more about Mechanus and get some really interesting ideas by that. And then, of course, I'm going to include a couple of little rascals who are very chaotic, who like are constantly like on wanted posters. Like, this guy keeps fucking shit up. We need to catch this guy. And there's just some little stinker who's running around being like,
Wrenchy McGee. He just goes around and he throws wrenches into things.
I love that idea so much. Just a small monkey with wings, throwing a monkey wrench into it. I love that idea. So yeah, so many interesting things.
Cool. So that'll show up in our home game one day.
You never know. You never know. Although I do have, like, there are some other planes of existence that I do have planned.
Okay.
And I distinctly did not mention them here.
Fair enough.
So there you go. Eliminate, if you process by elimination, figure out what I did not mention. Maybe it'll show.
Right. Okay. I'm just going to have to go back and listen to this episode and, like, really chop it down.
In, like, a year. Yeah. But that is pretty much, I mean, there's so many planes of existence these days and stuff like that. And you can always invent your own and shit. But, like, one of the things I like about planes of existence in general is that it's a great jumping off point for me as a dungeon master when it comes to my own prep. For creating encounters.
Yeah.
And that being said, let's get into it.
Let's get into it. Nice segue.
Thank you. Because I think we need to sort of define what an encounter is. I imagine that some people are listening and they just assume that it might be combat specific.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you go onto D&D Beyond and you hit encounter builder, it's going to be a combat builder. But that's not just like, that's not what an encounter is necessarily. It can be combat, but it can also be a lot of other things.
Yeah.
An encounter is just basically your party coming across something while they're adventuring. They encounter something.
Yeah.
Anything.
They're encountering something. Exactly. And it sometimes there's all different kinds of reasons why you plan these encounters or come up with these encounters and stuff like that, or why they happen in the first place. We'll get into that. But just going over different types of encounters, for me, it's a little easy to break them down with like the 3 pillars of play that D&D 5th edition tries to emulate.
Yeah.
Social, combat, exploration. And then if you think of those as like 3 circles in a triple Venn diagram, there's all different kinds of combinations.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like old school dungeon crawling, presumably you're hitting all 3 types of encounters throughout that dungeon crawl. You know, like you're looking for traps and finding clues and doing puzzles and stuff. There's exploration. Maybe you encounter some other dungeon crawlers with you. There's some social stuff. You could speak with dead if you find a body or something, social encounter. And then you're going to fight some fucking monsters.
Yeah.
Combat.
Yeah, I mean, it's really is, encounters are what you do as a DM. That is basically the biggest part of your job as a DM, honestly, is coming up with the encounters and keeping them interesting and fresh at the end of the day.
Yeah, and it's like, I think of it as little things to do. It's just things for the players to do and interact with. So you guys are traveling through a big forest. Before the session, I might come up with a couple of possible encounters. Here's an NPC that you might run into. Here's a bad guy that you might have to fight, or a monster or whatever. And here's a bunch of like environmental factors that you have to deal with. So there's different types of encounters that you'll come across. Otherwise you're just getting immediately to whatever your next thing is, which is also technically an encounter.
Right, exactly. Yeah, right? It's like one of those
some
things.
Encounters are big and some are tiny.
Yeah, but everything you do in D&D is basically an encounter of some sort.
Right. Exactly.
Everything you do in D&D can be broken down into one of these 3 components, or one or more of the 3: social, combat, exploration. I mean, that you're making encounters.
Yeah, exactly. And I think from the player's perspective, there are times when you're going to be able to like initiate your own encounters that maybe the dungeon master doesn't necessarily have like super planned or prepped or something like that, but it doesn't mean that it's not an encounter in its own way.
Right.
But like, you know, like there's going to be times when the players are like, hey, actually, does this town have an armorer? Like, or like a blacksmith or something like that? And the GM might be like, shit, I didn't even think about that. But yeah, they definitely would. So yes, you find a blacksmth. That encounter to talk to that blacksmith and go shopping a little bit is technically an encounter. And it can be so fast where it's like, we're not even going to RP it. And it's just, you're looking for a new shield? Great.
Right.
It's this much gold. Mark it off your sheet. Make a persuasion check to get a better price or whatever you want to do and move on. Or it can be a little bit longer where you're going to introduce who runs this blacksmith shop, who is the blacksmith, what makes the shield special. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Depending on what you're trying to go for or how much time you have or something like that. Or like maybe this is like the 15th blacksmith you visited over the course of a couple months of playing. And it's like, we're not going to do this again.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like that.
Yeah,
you know?
You've got that one player who's like buying 10 darts at a time, uses all of them in one fight, and then like, okay, well, I got to go talk to the blacksmith to make more darts. Okay.
Yeah. You don't necessarily have to RP it every time.
Right. But yeah, I think the biggest thing, I guess, for encounters, like it's the smallest, I would say, the smallest chunk of DMing. Like, so you start from the high scope of being like, you're running a whole campaign. The campaign itself is going to be X amount of chapters or levels or whatever you're talking about. And then each one of those levels or chapters is going to have X amount of sessions. And each one of those sessions is going to have a certain number of encounters.
Yeah.
Is basically how it boils down.
Yeah, exactly. And it depends on, it can vary. Because I know in some of our games during those sort of, you know, when you guys are traveling from A to B or something like that, I easily will hit 4, 5, 6 encounters.
Right.
In one session. And it's like, what do we normally play for? Like 5 hours is kind of normal for us. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is on the longer side for some people. Some people prefer to have shorter sessions, but you know, you just plan everything accordingly.
I've talked to people who have 8-hour sessions. It's insane. That's a job.
That is insane. That is a lot, actually. I could not imagine. On Thursdays, I play D&D twice. Once on our stream and once in a home game, and it is a lot of D&D.
Yeah.
A lot.
Yeah.
But I'm a player in the other one, so it's a little bit easier.
That's good.
Yeah. I couldn't pass up being a level 10 Bard Warlock.
Oh, so no. Why would you?
I know that this is going to be a lot, but I got to do it. When do I ever get to be this high level? But, so we talked about there's all different kinds of encounters. Yep. What is an encounter? It's like you can think of it as this little building block, modular. It's your little Lego brick that you can build different shapes and stories with. But that's like a very bird's eye view of it. It's this building block to create campaigns and adventures and stuff like that. But let's talk about how we can use encounters and why we're coming out with encounters and stuff like that. Because I think, you know, on its face, you can just be like, oh, yeah, they're just coming up with this encounter so that we can, like, eat some time up. You know? Right. I need the players to do something. I don't want them to just immediately get to the dragon's lair. So, like, I need them to do some shit beforehand. And it's like, that's a really unromantic way of looking at it. So, like, hopefully there's some legitimate motives behind creating these encounters, and there's all different kinds of reasons for coming up with different encounters, and some of them are specific to the encounter itself, right? But broadly speaking, there's a couple reasons.
Yeah. The first and foremost is, you know, for story progression. Like, you're going to need to come up with some encounters that are hard. Like, okay, this is my BBEG. This is the thing that everybody's been kind of pushing towards. This needs to be, you know, built up and thought out. It's not something you can necessarily just throw together unless, you know, the players come up with a way to catch you on your heels, but that's another episode.
Yeah. And then, because you're absolutely right, there are like certain encounters where as a DM you kind of feel this unwritten pressure to like, or unspoken pressure to like have it be meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like your example of the BBEG fight is a great one, because it's like, yeah, we've been playing this game for years. If we're finally attacking Corvus Cancer, the BBEG, I need it to feel like it is the BBEG.
Right.
Like, if not a single player goes down or something like that, or like you guys all wipe them out in 2 rounds or something crazy, you know what I mean? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Then it's like, wow, that was anticlimactic, and that's not necessarily what I want. I don't think that's what we want from the story.
Yeah, and that's really, but it also goes further than that, like as far as like that kind of unspoken pressure that you were talking about. Like when I'm planning my campaign and stuff and sessions and stuff like that, like in my mind's eye, I can kind of see the scene in front of me. Like there are certain times where you want to kind of really take the time to set that scene for something like, you know, they're meeting the king in the throne room for the first time, or your team comes up on an abandoned, ruined village. Like there are scenes that should be kind of thought out and planned out a bit, just because in order for the picture to be painted in everybody's mind, you've got to take the time to paint it, you know?
Right. Yeah. Definitely. And that could look differently to different DMs in terms of how you get there, how you get to that point. Because sometimes it's like, you know, you could even go as far as writing a little script of here's what the description is or something like that. Even if you don't read right off of it, at least writing it down can help. But you could also do bullet points. You could also just like go on Pinterest and find some pictures that inspire you. And then you can just literally describe what you're looking at. So there's different ways to do it, but I do think that is big.
Mm-hmm.
So like using encounters as a form of session prep, I have found to be so helpful, just to have things planned and prepared and stuff like that. So it's like there's less lulls in the session.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like we're going from beat to beat.
Yeah, because there are times where, you know, it can get, what's the word I'm looking for? Trudgy, where you just kind of like, it feels like the same old kind of slog type of deal, and like the session itself kind of has a weird momentum if you're unprepared. Like I've done this myself as a freshy DM of not reading the adventure book enough before a session. And that time that you have to take flipping from page to page to find, oh crap, they moved into this room, and you got to flip, and then look at it and read it and make sure, okay, so this is what happens. All right. Yeah. All right, and now what do you want to do? And like, you've lost your players by then. It's just 15, 20 minutes you've taken to figure out the information, and you've lost your players' attention. It's good to have those encounters ready to go, so to speak.
Right. Yeah.
As part of the session
it's
prep.
Super helpful. Yeah, because it's the whole thing of D&D, this collaborative storytelling, like we always refer to it as, is like, in order for your players to truly collaborate with you and partake in this storytelling, you have to give them something to work with.
Right.
Right? Like, I mean, of course, there's like all different kinds of cases where like the players can kind of take a little bit extra agency and kind of do their own world building depending on, you know, the style of game that you're trying to play. But it's so much easier when you're asking your players, all right, what do you guys want to do? And there's like a huge pause. Chances are that is either because they're just not immersed in that moment, or they don't know what to do. Because in their mind's eye, their visual, and this has a lot to do with, I've watched so many TikTok videos recently about how people, if you say like apple, and like, what do you picture in your mind? Are you picturing a red apple visually? Are you picturing the word apple? That's a different discussion.
Right.
Because that's like a whole thing. But.
Fair.
This idea of like, it is sort of theater of the mind, until you're using battle maps and shit, but like you need to make sure that they have something going on, some kind of idea of where the characters are in the story, in the world, in space and time and stuff like that, so that they can fucking interact with it.
Yeah, I mean, it is really, at the end of the day, the most important thing here is keeping everybody engaged. So session prep is key for, first and foremost, for encounters and stuff like that. There should be definitely some prepped stuff. However, there will definitely 100%, 1 billion, trillion, quadrillion % happen where you will get caught with your players doing something that you were not expecting. And hey, guess what? Now we've got to come up with an encounter on the fly.
Yeah, absolutely.
In my experience, most of these are combat.
Oh, yeah.
Most of these are, hey, I had a social encounter planned for you guys, but you just straight up stabbed that dude. So now we're fighting.
Right. Yeah, I can definitely see that happening. I can definitely see that happening. Or the reverse, although less likely. Sometimes you think
where they
that
try to
it's
talk
going
the
to
bad
go
guy down.
combat, and they talk them down.
Yeah.
Or they try to, at least. I can't tell you how many times I ran the first session of Sphinx City. When people try and go into the secret lab, spoilers for Sphinx City, it's on YouTube. But where people try and go into the lab wearing the lab coats, they got the name tags, they're trying to be like, no, we work here. That a lot of people try to do that.
Yeah.
A lot of people try and get the jump on villains by infiltrating or, deceiving them or whatever. But I think for me, like my personal use of encounters, I use them for both session prep and in cases of improv, in the sense that I am I think unique just because I talk to so many other DMs and everybody seems to be more about like kind of doing things on the fly, and I'm such like I like prepping.
Right.
So I'll have encounters planned out that may never come up, but like if we hit a lull or they plan something that I'm not super prepared for or something like that, sometimes I have a list of encounters ready to go and I can like pull one out locked and loaded and shoot that bad boy off.
And there definitely is something to be said for having this kind of bank of encounters that are just kind of ready to go as well. Just for what you were just saying of filling in that lull of some sort, or hey, you guys rushed through that section and now if we go the way that things are going, we're going to be done in 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's not just for the sake of stringing everybody along, but everybody's trying to have a good time for 3 hours. If you're done in
so
20
there is
minutes.
like the 100%, dude. There is like the above board, like let's be real, let's get down to brass tacks. You are also trying to play the game for a certain amount of time and not be like, all right, well, we're done. I wasn't expecting you to skip those two first things, and you ended up not fighting this guy and decided to hide instead, and they walked by. Well, that's all I had planned, so we're kind of done. And it's like, okay, also not great. So there is like a very real point of being like, well, also I am trying to fill 3 hours of time.
Right.
But if we look a little bit more deeply, another thing's like looking deeply on why these encounters exist, not just from the above board looking at it as like the dungeon master and why the dungeon master should prepare encounters, but like why this encounter exists. Like, why are the players running into a social encounter in the middle of the woods? A couple of things come to mind. It's like so many opportunities for world building or plot development or touching on an individual character's backstory.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a million reasons for these world building wise. And like we said at the top, like they don't all have to be combat. It's just a matter of figuring out how to make those things seem like they're supposed to be there. Like getting back to that example of the social encounter in the middle of the woods. Who are you talking to in the middle of the woods? What do you mean there's a social encounter and we're in the middle of the damn woods? Oh, well, there's a lumberjack. Bam. Social encounter.
Right. Exactly. And then depending on how much time you want to prep or how much like well thought out and well versed you are in the setting and the world and stuff like that, take it one step further and be like, okay, we know why there's a person in the woods, because they're a lumberjack. But why is it important for the players to run into them? Is it because, like, I just want them to know that lumberjacks exist? Which is honestly
it's valid.
Fine.
Absolutely valid.
Maybe they mentioned something about the lumber industry and how it's failing because X, Y, and Z. There's a group of druids who have been hampering down on the lumber industry. Good for them, by the way. But who knows? You can go so deep. And maybe the lumberjack has some kind of information that is important or some sort of ability to flesh out the plot or something. He can mention a tiny detail that the players now have that they wouldn't have had if they didn't talk to that guy.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, it's the same thing of, like, players are eventually just going to cast, speak with animals, speak with plants, speak with dead, and they're going to ask questions. Social encounters are a way to kind of beat them to the punch, in a sense. You know what I mean? Like, they don't even have to cast speak with plants to ask a random ass tree what the fuck's going on in the forest, because the lumberjack can be like, here's what the fuck is going on in the forest.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's always really nice to have these ways of furthering your world building, or, an encounter that, just kind of another thing of just like an exploration type encounter of you guys find some old kind of like crypt and there's a symbol on it that your druid recognizes. Hey, there could be a secret in there.
Yeah, there you go. Because now you've hit so many birds with one stone. Why does the druid the only one who recognizes it?
Druid.
Now you're tying into one particular character shit, which is great. Also, who does this crypt belong to? Why is this crypt here?
Right.
All different kinds of things you can do with these different encounters. You can get as heady as you want with it and go like so deep and like complex and connected to so many red strings, right? Or you can just be like, hey, my players just got teleported to the Feywild. It feels weird for them to just instantly know where to go because none of them have been to the Feywild.
Mm-hmm.
I'll introduce a marching band full of mushrooms.
Yeah. That was
and
really
they
great.
all play their own instruments, and they will give instructions if the party plays along with them.
Yep.
That's a social encounter that was so easy.
Super silly, but it does world building. It does social encounter. It gets your plot furthered. It's very, you can pack a lot of stuff into one encounter.
Yeah. And that was what? It was like 20 minutes?
Mm-hmm.
Like something all like said and done of the session. Maybe more because our table for that particular game, like we do sometimes, like social encounters can take longer just because we're cheesing. We're having a good time.
We get silly. Yeah.
We're goofing. Yeah.
We're goofing. But that's honestly the best for social encounters is just
for one of the Sphinx City episodes that we recently did where Belcor couldn't make it, so it was just you and Sean playing Jaster and Euland, and without giving away spoilers, that whole episode is just social encounters, really. I mean, it's exploration sort of in the sense of making some skill checks to like bing a couple things and like look up things and get information, but it kind of was mainly social and easily filled 3 hours. I had to rush at the end to finish everything.
Yeah. We were really, honestly, could have kept talking for another 2 hours.
Yeah, we spent almost just an hour between you and your hacker friend.
Yeah.
Like, and that's just, I easily, like, looking back, the hindsight's 2020, I could have easily cut that down so much more. He did not have to go on such a big tirade about cryptocurrency or the blockchain, but I thought it was funny, and it was funny. So
those are
sometimes
only a couple
your
of
encounters
lines,
can just be silly.
Yeah.
They can just be silly and fun and stuff like that. They don't need to, connect to backstories and world building, but they can. And the same is true for combat encounter. And I'll give an example. In Sword Coast Q, you all got attacked sort of in the middle of the night by a bunch of Aaron Yeses, these women devils who can fly and shoot poisoned arrows and stuff like that. And at first you're just like, what the fuck is this? Like, we're getting attacked. How annoying. Kill them. And in their pocket, you find like a list of targets, like an assassination list. And so eventually you find out, okay, the BBEG has our number. Somehow he can track us. Like, he's sending assassins.
Yeah.
So it was a little bit of world building on top of just having a cool encounter.
What's the one that I kind of just leapt around a bunch?
I think it was that one. That was the one. Yeah, because they flew in the air.
Yeah.
And like
so
an idiot, I could have just had them fly a little bit higher. Honestly. Could have had them fly just a little bit higher and didn't.
That was just one of the sillier moments for me, because it was just, I would jump as high as I could and then just tank that fucking fall damage at the end.
Yeah. And for those listening, it's not like his character can actually jump that high. It really comes down to riding on top of a moorbounder that has like a 40 foot standing jump or something insane. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Insane. Be really careful about giving your characters mounts. Make it so abundantly clear that they have to return the mount for one reason or another. But anyway, yeah. So there's so many different ways and things to do with plots and stuff. I mean, like, when you guys were traveling from Waterdeep all the way to Nesme, the amount of encounters that you guys went through, I mean, it was several sessions.
Oh yeah.
Right? To get from A to B, and that's before the actual portion of that chapter really begins, right?
Yeah.
And there were encounters along the entire way, not just on the travel, but like stopping at all the different little towns. You stop in Sunny's hometown. There's a lot of main, like, or backstory stuff going on there. We get to see Sunny's family again. There's a festival going on that Sunny's really excited for. Sunny gets engaged during that session.
Yeah.
A lot of big stuff happens. Then we go to Yarder. In Yarder, there's all different kinds of interesting stuff happening. The town was just attacked by a purple worm. You find out all these other little details. And I'm working in world building plot stuff also along the way. You know, like when you went from Yarder to Mornburn Shield, everything starts becoming more and more wintry because we know that there's an ancient white dragon whose influence, their like region, like, you know how legendary monsters have regional effects? His regional effects are growing in size and intensity. So you're hitting like, it's like the very beginning of winter and you're already hitting like dead of winter weather.
Yeah.
And then there's this giant ice wall. Yeah, you guys come across a giant ice wall, do a couple Arcana checks and stuff, find out that... How dare you? Find out that the ice wall is not the edge of the world. In fact, it was created by a dragon, by a white dragon. And at first, you all thought, oh no, this is Pop Ping So, the ancient dragon. Later to find out, Pop Ping So's got a little kid, an adult dragon. Oh no, two dragons.
Hate to see
it.
Boy.
Oh boy.
Oh boy.
So many different fun encounters that are possible. I love coming up with encounters. It's the easiest way for me to plan things.
Yeah. I think,
you know?
like I was saying earlier, I mean, it's easier to plan encounters than it is to plan a whole campaign, you know?
Yes.
And a session is just a session is just a string of encounters.
Yeah.
You don't even necessarily have to have a whole campaign planned out. You don't need to have a whole bunch of anything planned out. If you've got a list of encounters and a table full of willing people, you can run a D&D session.
Yep, absolutely. And then, like, yeah, I guess when it comes down to a campaign, just having the vaguest idea of, like, they're going to try and save the world. That's the point of the campaign.
Yeah. You can kind of fill in the other stuff as it goes.
What do they have to save it from? And then, yeah, a bunch of building blocks to get there. That's obviously simplifying it a little bit, but it can be that simple.
Yeah.
Because, once you get a couple more months and games and sessions under your belt, then you can really start getting into some heady shit, you know? Having there be
absolutely.
I love, because I like writing a lot, I'm a big fan of foreshadowing. And so having encounters that offer these tiny little nuggets of foreshadowing is challenging because you need it to be enough of a big deal that the players will remember it. and the characters, but also not so big that it completely side rails everything, you know, like, so like the little example is having one of the characters' romantic partners just start ghosting them. And as far as they know, it's just because he's a dickhead. But in reality, there's some really legitimate reasons. And when it all comes to pass, man, what a great how do you want to do this moment for that character to kill the person responsible for this ghosting.
Yeah.
So many fun examples.
And that is, you know, that's kind of what you're going for, to get these big moments that everybody enjoys. Because even though only one player got the killing blow, we all had a blast watching that person die.
Yeah, no doubt. Absolutely. That was a really intense battle, too. The Witch Queen from Tome of Beasts, Cobalt Press, shout out, because that monster stat block, CR17, absolutely fucking insane. Anytime you have a spellcaster legendary monster who has legendary actions where they can cast another spell, goodness gracious, it is fucking deadly. Because it's like, yeah, on their turn they cast this spell and you're like, counter spell. But then when it's not their turn and they're like, I'm going to cast another spell, and it's like, oh no, my reaction hasn't recharged. Like, what the fuck? Yeah. And then she also has counter spell. Holy shit, dude. That stat block is unreal. But anyway, so I want to talk so briefly about random encounters. Just because when you're talking D&D and you say the phrase encounters, I feel like random encounters is going to come up in some way. Just because it's like in the zeitgeist, if you will. 10% of me knows what zeitgeist means, based fully on context alone.
No, I mean, you used it right. It's basically just the common, like,
the ether,
the collective consciousness.
Yeah. Got it.
Like, most people in this space have heard of the terms random encounters.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like, I've talked about this in other episodes and stuff like that. I don't love random encounters that are truly 100% random.
Yeah.
That are, like, just, you could fit them anywhere and it just is, like, so random to the point of, like, it doesn't offer anything interesting. It's just, oh, you rolled a 5 on the D20, 2D4 wolves attack, I guess. I hate that. Me personally. If you like that, your table's cool with it, whatever.
Like it.
You like it?
Yeah, I'm on the other side of the fence with it. Just because my table is a bunch of Final Fantasy nerds and they love combat. They're all about combat. So,
no doubt.
You know, it's just one of those things where I do use random encounter tables a lot. I generally, about half of them, if not more, are some form of combat or another. Whether it be something avoidable that they don't have to do, or like just, which they also do because they're mindful of things like resource drain, and I will just throw things at them to get them to use their spell slots and then throw a big bad at them. So, you know, especially after we played together for a while, they kind of got onto that bit of, you know, just because it's combat encounter doesn't mean there has to be a combat.
Yes, very true.
And that makes it interesting and makes it more doable to throw like, okay, cool, a squadron of goblins shows up on the road. You can either sit here and let them go, and you ambush them, or you can just attack them head on. And they're like, well, we're just gonna go hide in the trees for a couple minutes. We're gonna fuck them.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think that it's like, when I'm designing random encounter tables, the reason I don't like the standard ones that come in some of the adventure modules is because I think that they're a little too, like, superficial. Like, I'm fine with a random encounter table being majority combat. Obviously, some of that depends on the table and, like, how that table feels about combat and RP and what they find fun. Right. But I'm fine with it being mostly combat. My thing is, like, I would like it more if, instead of it just saying literally 2d4 wolves, if those wolves had something to do with the world in, like, the tiniest way. Like, it's one thing if you're going through the forest, it's like, yeah, there's just a fucking group of wolves, like, that just happens. But like, I don't know. I just think it would be a little bit more interesting if it was like 2d4 wolves and an evil druid. Like now it's already more interesting. Or like 2d4 wolves that are pulling a sled and something. I don't know. Like I always come up with my own random encounter tables because I like doing, instead of just, okay, here you're going through the Arctic tundra, instead of it just straight up being like 2 frost giants, having it be like you come across 2 frost giants who are arguing with each other and and so then there's a little bit more setup, and that makes it easier for me. Again, I like prep, so keep that in mind. I like planning these random encounters so that when it's time to use the table, there's less for me to improv in that moment. I don't. I'm not just reading 2 frost giants and then I have to in my head be like, okay, are the frost giants hunting? Are they coming up? Like, are they just standing there? Are they keeping guard? Or are they on a search party? Like, what the fuck are these giants doing? I already have it planned. So that's just me as somebody who likes prep.
I see what you're saying there. And that's kind of something that I do think about while I'm in the like prep stage of like a new adventure module or something like that, where I will read over. Like I said, I generally will read over the whole book cover to cover 3 or 4 times, and I am looking at that encounter table and I do try to think of ways, if they're not spicy enough, to spice them up a little bit, because you're not wrong. I mean, 2d4 wolves is boring, but that's kind of the job that's kind of like comes with the territory of the DM of kind of making them a little bit spicier, a little more. Give them that umami,
Exactly. Yeah, Giving them a little flavor with the umami. Put some fucking soy sauce on that guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This unseasoned chicken, get the fuck out of here with this. It's the one white people stereotype I can't stand. I get it. It's justified, but what the fuck, man? Put some goddamn seasoning on your I think that I just like random encounters to feel less random, in the sense of like the randomness comes from I'm gonna roll on a table, right? And it could be any one of these. It could be a random encounter, but not just like those 2D wolves can be fucking anywhere.
Yeah.
You could fight them in the forest, on the grassland, in the Arctic. You could fight wolves all over the place. In an urban landscape would be really interesting, but
there's bears.
You're in the city square. There's 2d4 wolves. Oh no! Where did these wolves come from? How did these wolves get here? Ah! Pandemonium breaks out. Now you have a social encounter. Now you have all kinds of encounters. So many different ideas. But yeah. And then I always do include some social encounters as well in my random encounter tables, just to switch things up. Just because if combat didn't take so long, maybe I would have there be like more combat. But I think just because combat takes forever, sometimes it's like, I mean, you say that like social encounters don't take forever too, though. I know. But social encounters are just more fun because you can talk and like. I know. And there's goofs. My thing there's a lot more goofs involved with the social encounters. There's usually more goofs. But I think that it's much easier for me to get through 3 social encounters in an hour and a half. You're not than wrong. It is to get through 3 combat encounters. Like, depending on the how intense it is. And now that we're at higher levels, it's even harder. Because either, I'm still learning as a DM. Like, I don't think you ever stop learning, Right. So it's like, I don't play like a million D&D games with a ton of different tables and different players who are all multiple levels throughout D&D. This is my first time DMing a group of level 12 players in a campaign. So like, I'm still learning things as we go of like, how do I find that line of like, I don't necessarily want the combat to be literally over in 1 round. Right. But I don't want it to be so hard that we're here for 3 hours. Yeah. So like finding it's hard to toe that line. Yeah. And then like working in the environment as well and having there to be different possibilities. But it's so fun. I have such a blast with it. And that was an encounter. So like, I'll use that as an example. So we're in the Shadowfell. Mm-hmm. I had planned 3 social encounters, and we went through them quicker than I thought. First, there was just an old lady riding a magic carpet who had 2 hairless cats named Fight or Flight. And she was incredibly old and wrinkly, looked like the oldest woman alive. But she was super spry and limber. And it's because she recently went to a life broker where she paid a huge amount of money to receive like the life force of like 30 plus years back into her life, and therefore she's literally 30 years younger even though she still looks the same. And that was just a decision I made because I thought it was funny. Of course I
think that is funny. That's
60 years old.
No, but that's
I thought it was funnier if she
way
looks
funnier.
90.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's funnier.
That was one social encounter, and it was just her talking about the life broker. And that was the little bit of world building. It was obviously there for comedy. And then just this idea of, yeah, there's the life broker. And also tiny bits of information about one of the towns that you guys are sort of heading towards. Just a little extra information about stuff that is there. And then the next encounter was the death echo, the death loop kind of thing. Where you guys came across a cursed battlefield. And there were ghosts on the battlefield who were reliving their death over and over again in loops. And so they could still interact with the players. They would be like, hey, what are you doing on this battlefield? How are you doing? And then just get shot with an arrow. And then they would like glitch and like flicker. And then they would just come back and be like, hey, what are you doing on this battlefield? Arrow in the neck. Just over and over again.
This is Cal's fucking nightmare walking through this place.
Exactly, yeah. Cal with the soldier background.
My personal characters, like my characters, oh man, this was the worst place for him.
Yes, exactly. And I think that was one of the reasons why I decided not to delve deeper into that encounter. Like,
right.
We could have made a whole rest of the session on that. On how do we cure this? How do we fix this? Is there a way? Like, who's causing this? What is causing this? Do we have to, like, find a way to essentially do the equivalent of casting like the Hallow spell to like completely cleanse the battlefield of evil spirits? Like, how do we get rid of this? But instead, we just kind of skated through it because it was like, this sucks. This sucks for Cal. This is such a shitty situation. I don't know if Cal wants to sit here and try and spend the rest of his day figuring this out.
And watching the same people he's trying to save die over and over and over and over again.
Yeah, not great. So we skated past that. Then there was a funny little encounter of a food cart going through spider-infested woods with a big sign on the side of the food cart that just said, "It ain't meat." And there was 10 minutes of discussion of being like, it's gotta be human, right? Is it human, you think? Probably. And then being like, well, I guess technically human is meat, so it's probably not. Let's just ask him. And it turned out to just all be mushroom-based food.
It was all mushroom-based
it was
food. That
vegan,
was,
if anything.
Yeah, and it was surprisingly funny because it gave us like wild magic, right?
Oh, yes. Yeah. It gave you, while you eat it until you take a long rest, you have the effects of, like, a modified version of Wild Magic Sorcerer vibes.
Right.
Every time you cast a leveled spell, you have to roll a d20. If you roll a 1, it has to roll on the Magic Surge table. If you roll higher than a 1, then it ramps up to a 1 and a 2. And then a 1 and 2 and a 3, and so on and so forth until you surge. And because that happened, and then it was like, we still had like over an hour to go, right? Like in the session. So then the next session, which ends up being combat, that happened on the fly. I did not have that planned whatsoever.
Nice.
So really quickly, I pull up some random ass monster who I homebrewed that I could fuck with. Yeah, I homebrewed that it had spider climb so that it could touch webs and shit. Or that's not spider climb, that's web walker.
Web walk, yeah.
It has web walker, so it can touch spider webs. The Dragoloth, some fucking weird perversion of Fae and Shadow Fiend or something. I think technically it's a fiend, but it is like connected to Drow. I don't know.
We laid the
found
down.
found a map. Yeah, it was quick work, but it was really fun because we did get to see some wild magic surge, which that was the point of the combat.
Right.
I was not trying to that was, you know what I mean? Like the combat had nothing to do with me like testing you or draining resources, or it had nothing
we
to do
ate
with
the wild magic food and we wanted to do wild magic stuff.
Exactly.
We were all doing it. We were all throwing spells out that we shouldn't have been throwing out just because I want to see the wild magic.
Yeah. And we did a couple times.
Mm-hmm.
I think 2 or 3 people got to wild magic surge. As per usual with the magic surge table, a couple of them were harmless, silly little floofs of nothingness. And finally, we got the wizard polymorphing themselves into a sheep. And, my night was made. That's all I wanted. That's all I wanted. So it worked out beautifully.
And that all, like he said, or like they said, it was all based off of this one encounter, this social encounter of the mushrooms, the mushroom vendor. It ain't meat. It was really probably all based off of that one joke. If I know you in any way, shape, or form, it would be really funny if there was just a cart riding around that just said, "It ain't meat."
Yeah,
it's all
well,
vegan
it
stuff.
comes down to, that's such a good question. So then let's get into so briefly how to come up with encounters, and we'll just touch a little bit on it. Maybe in a future episode we can go more in depth and give like really good examples and stuff. But like, there's no one way to come up with encounters. But for that encounter specifically, I used the environment, the pure fact of we're in the Shadowfell,
right?
So what is like a harmless encounter that can happen? So not combat, because combat I think is almost easier sometimes.
Yeah.
Right? There's entire stat blocks. D&D Beyond has like, you can change by environment. You could just Bing it and just type in Shadowfell monsters D&D, and it'll have a fucking wiki page full of ideas.
Right.
But when I'm trying to come up with like silly little joke ideas. So then it's like, okay, what could happen? A traveling food cart. Done. All right, well, what kind of food do they eat in the Shadowfell? And naturally, my mind went to mushrooms. Right?
Fair. Okay.
So then I'm thinking of what is the cart gonna be called? Because I you know me, dude. I have to. Everything has to have a name, like a clever name, or at least a stupid name. It's gotta have something. So then I'm sitting there for 20 minutes, being like, magic mushroom mystery. No, that's stupid. Like, because I'm obsessed with alliteration, so usually it's like, how many M's can I do in a row? And decided against that. So then I was like, no, let's make it like mysterious in the sense of the sign won't mention mushrooms at all.
Yeah.
And then somehow I landed on it ain't meat.
So
I thought that was so funny because of course at first it isn't meat, and I was like, no, that's dumb. And something about being in the Shadowfell, this like dreary, dark, deadly plane of existence, and having a character name their business with the word ain't in it was so funny to me.
So it kind of fits with me with the vibe though at this point of the Shadowfell, because you've basically made the Shadowfell 1840s West.
Yeah,
like it's just bit. The Wild West. It like anachronistically inside Shadowfell, like millennia before its time. Like if we were going off of like the not millennia, but like hundreds of years between the like medieval ages, which is kind of where we're at, and the turn of the century Wild West.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, for sure. Most of that, Serpico really laid the groundwork for that. The town with the snake people. I gave off that vibe hard. There's like, I mean, eventually you'll go to other towns and you'll see that that's not how
it's not all the Wild West.
Shadowfell is set up. Yeah, definitely not. Like,
okay,
you guys will avoid it because it's so out of your way. But there was the town Tribeca. Tribeca was going to be much more like Metropolis vibes, like very like pretty urban. City vibes, not like incredibly technological.
So the whole of Shadowfell is kind of this anachronistic situation where it's all kind of out of time.
Just
okay,
a mix and match.
Okay,
Yeah, because,
I really like that vibe though. Like I really do like that because it does kind of, it's different.
I mean, we talked about using encounters as building blocks. I drew a little hand-drawn map of my section of the Shadowfell that we were going to be in.
Mm-hmm.
And I did that kind of thing that you see on maps sometimes, especially like children's maps, where like instead of New York City, it's just like a drawing of the Statue of Liberty, and then it just says NYC, that kind of thing. So I just drew little icons for these different things that the players could go to, and that was like a really broad encounter idea. So it's just, here's Tribeca, it's a flooded city. Like picture New York City, but flooded.
Right.
And their entire economy, culture, society is based around that. The fact that they live in a flooded city. The little icon is a pipe that is dripping. And that's Tribeca. So just very vague. And then I would work in smaller encounters inside of that. You know? So like, there was the, what the hell is it called? Edge Falls is a coastal port town that has this weird relationship with gravity where like parts of the cliff are falling off, but then they get caught in this like anti-gravity field where they begin to float. So there are like parts of the city that are floating on gigantic boulders and shit. And that's like the most basic bullet point of like an idea.
Right.
Just that, right?
Right.
Okay. Now, under that, I put a bullet points of the different things that they can encounter inside that city. Here's the shop. Here's a cult. Like, here's an organization. Here's some entertainment or something. Here's the tavern. And all the different things that you can encounter inside of that.
Yeah.
So, like, when I'm coming up with encounters, sometimes it's just using the environment. Sometimes a lot of times will create encounters based on monsters and like their stat blocks, or even like some of the pre-written lore about them. For example, that life broker. That's something from Cobalt Press as well. There's a specific monster stat block for a creature called the life broker. And it essentially has abilities. I'm paraphrasing big time, but it essentially has abilities where you can like donate years off your life in return for money.
Right.
Or vice versa. And I was just like, oh, that's a really cool idea. It's way too low CR for our players to ever fuck with it, like in a fight.
Right.
But there's nothing to say it can't be an NPC.
Yeah.
So I'll just make it an NPC and there's another encounter. And then sometimes it's plot and backstory stuff.
I mean, another example of using the monsters and like the written lore that they have. We kind of talked a little bit about it back when we did the one shot, or one of the one shots that we did with the fake dragon. But like, if you look into the lore of a kobold, kobolds will hang around dragons. Like they're kind of like, they like dragons. They're like, will worship and kind of protect them. So like, you know, kobolds might not be necessarily something that you would expect to have in a high level encounter, but you know, if you've got a dragon that's fighting, and then it would sometimes make sense for that dragon to have 15, 20 little kobold dudes that are around harassing your players too, you know, or absolutely. They'll be there on the lead up to the dragon's lair.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many different examples. Sometimes you're just reading things about the most simple things. Like sometimes I'll look at like a legendary monster and I'll just look at the regional effects and just get ideas from that. Maybe I don't even use the monster, right? Like these are cool ideas. Like you can get inspiration from everywhere. Like Taylor and I have mentioned in past episodes, like you can tell when we're watching certain animes because certain things pop up and it's like, oh, all right, Justin's going through a bleach kick right now because that sword just became a full ass person. Is Zanpakuto just became a fucking person.
That guy has a half a mask on? Come on, dude.
Exactly. So many different ideas, dude. It's so funny. So yeah, you can come up with encounters so many different ways depending on what type of encounter it is. And you can also use the plot and stuff like that, the backstories, like you know, go deep into your player characters' backstories and stuff. Maybe they mentioned a tiny detail that you haven't had a chance to shed light on yet, and maybe something comes up. Because that's one of my favorite things to do is I use humor so frequently, and it's such a fun way to bring down the players' walls because they're just going to be like, oh, this is so silly. Oh my God, it ain't meat. Of course I'll eat this mushroom. Now you're all wild magic surged. What the fuck? It's so fun.
I bought more.
You have one extra one. You have one extra.
Yep.
One extra serving of some type of mushroom. I forget exactly what you got, but yeah. I think it might be stuffed mushrooms. I forget what you got.
I think it might have been another portobello burger.
I know your character ate a burger.
I had a burger.
Maybe you got another burger. Yeah. So silly. So silly. But so much fun. And like
absolutely.
You know, it's like like I said, there's no wrong way to create an encounter. I think what I find to be a huge asset for me when I'm coming up with encounter ideas is just making sure that I'm hydrated and just making sure that I'm drinking enough water to get the juices coming.
Okay. All right.
And that's all thanks to Big Tap.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, well, that's all we can get into this time. You can find us on TikTok and Instagram at Soyouwannabeadm, or you can ask us a question at soyouwannabeadm@gmail.com. If you liked the episode, don't forget to give us 5 stars and a review wherever you found us. And check out the Patreon and our Twitch with the link in the description. Join us next time for more Dungeon Master tips and tricks.
Bye!
See ya!
And now I have the honor of giving a shout out to the members of our Patreon gang. Lee, we can't wait to roll dice with you. Nub Muffins, may Paylor's light shine upon you. And there's Theo R, Vanessa D, Talk Screen, and Tappy. If you want a shout out, join the Adult or Ancient Dragon gangs on Patreon. Tune in next time for more tips and tricks from So You Wanna Be a DM.